So today we're joined by Martin Bright, who is perhaps best known for his role in exposing the Catherine Gun scandal, as well as other journalistic exploits. So it's perhaps unusual for the inexperienced journalist to be interviewing the very experienced one. But we'll just start off by asking, so you were played by Matt Smith in this film, so how did it feel to be played by Matt Smith?
It was extraordinary, I have to say. I can't pretend it wasn't a very unusual experience. It's something you talk about and maybe dream about, is being played by a film or TV star. You spend your time wondering who that might be. But in my, my experience of making the film, I couldn't have had a better actor playing me, to be honest. I did know him. I mean, I'd known him and worked with him previously on a BBC series called Party Animals. So I had the rather peculiar experience of contacting him and saying, Matt, would you like to play me? But I thought he did a great job, and I particularly liked the intensity of the performance. I think he captured very well what it's like to be in a busy newsroom under enormous pressure at a hugely important period of history.
So building on that, if I'm correct, so the scandal is that the US government is trying to use information, was trying to use information to get the UN, personal information to get the UN to pass a vote on the Iraq War. So what was your role in exposing this scandal?
I was working as a journalist at The Observer at the time, and I was Home Affairs editor, which means I was covering prisons, police, crime, but also the intelligence services. I mean, mainly sort of home intelligence, so MI5, the domestic intelligence service. But I was simply sitting in my office one day and I received a call from an old contact who said that she had this amazing document that someone had passed her from GCHQ. So I went to meet her, and on the face of it, it did appear to be exactly as she sold it. It was a document that suggested that the United Nations was being strong-armed by the United States and the UK to pass a vote to authorise the war in Iraq. And the important thing about that was that it would give the coalition legal cover for the war, so that their soldiers would not be accused of war crimes. So it was on the face of it, a hugely, hugely important story. The difficulty was that as I received it, this document was just a series of words on a piece of paper. Anybody could have written it. So the real job then was a collaborative job of working with other journalists to try and verify that what was on that piece of paper was in fact the truth.
I mean, I guess given the nature of what you're exposing, there were some very powerful forces against it. So how did you deal with these big forces? And what were they? The most difficult, honestly, the most difficult thing was the technical detail of actually proving it was true. So it was potentially an early example of fake news, right? We were told by very senior intelligence sources that this looked like it was the real thing, but it could be a sophisticated Russian forgery. Interesting. We were told that at the time. And thinking about where we are now, it's amazing that even back in 2003, people were talking about sort of dirty tricks by the Russian intelligence services. So that was really the most difficult thing. Clearly, it wasn't in the interest of the government for this information to be released. So we knew that they'd be putting pressure on our senior journalists over the story. But also within the newsroom, there were all sorts of tensions. There were people within our newsroom who backed the war, people who didn't. It was a very fractured and difficult time within the Observer. And so essentially all the tensions of the country, even the world, were playing themselves out within our newsroom. So that was extremely difficult. So you mentioned it in your answer, but fake news has probably become more prominent now than it has ever been. And
the Iraq War was also a polarising issue then, but there are far more polarising issues now as well, such as climate change or the rise of populism. So in light of this, do you think that the temptation for governments to use underhand tactics to try and further their own interests is greater than ever?
I think things have hugely changed, actually.
Yeah.
There is a connection, though. So I've thought about this a lot because we've been taking the film around the world, and we've been doing lots of question and answer sessions right across America and Europe. And this question often comes up. There are two questions really. Why does this matter? Isn't this just like historical now?
Yeah.
And at the same time, what does this say to us about fake news today?
Yeah.
And I think that what happened in 2003 was seismic in shaking public confidence in our institutions.
Yeah.
So there is a direct link, I think, that at the time you had politicians who were working, I think probably thinking themselves to be honourable.
Yeah.
The press assuming that if you showed people up for wrongdoing that it would matter. But then, because so many corners were cut in order to get us to war, public faith in those big institutions was lost. So I think, as a direct result over the years, politicians with populist agendas have been able to move into that space of mistrust, and that's where we find ourselves today.
So, do you think there's any way of sort of rebuilding this trust?
Well, we have to.
Yeah.
It's likely to be more your generation than my generation that do that, but we have to move away from a world of ultra-cynicism, where there's a temptation to say, well, they're all lying to us, nothing is true, everything is up for grabs, the only thing that matters is my particular individualistic take on the world, because that will lead us nowhere, and any bonds of solidarity will be gone. So I think it is the most urgent task of our age to pursue something. I mean, as a journalist, you're doing something quite simple, which is you're receiving information, you're trying to verify it, and then your job is to transmit that to the public in as accessible way as possible. And that's what we did with the Catherine Gunn story. Truth matters, and it will always matter. And in journalism, it matters. It matters more than ever. So I have to believe we're not fighting a losing battle. I have to believe that it's important to re-establish truth. And journalism is a basic human instinct. Whether it's gossip at one end of journalism or investigative journalism at the other, it's all about telling people stuff they don't know. So we will never lose that instinct. It's just about trying to find new ways of transmitting it.
And if we're looking at that from a governmental perspective, do you think we have to increase the accountability of the government so we can trust them?
It's always good to increase the accountability of government. The fourth estate, journalism, has always been an important plank in the structures of holding government to account. One of the problems is that as the financial model for newspapers has collapsed, and increasingly the more generally the media has become its own worst enemy in terms of the trust that the public has for it. These forces have made it increasingly difficult to hold government to account. But my feeling is that there is an appetite out there among the public. There are enough people who are not cynical to to make this job hugely important. And I actually think there are certain movements that make this all the more urgent. So you mentioned the issue of climate change. Verifiable truth is extremely important there, obviously.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, I think the coronavirus outbreak has been almost like the revenge of scientific truth.
Yeah.
You know, this is a moment where governments have to tell their populations the truth.
Yeah.
They have to be held to account for their reaction to this crisis. Also, we need to be told the scientific truth about the nature of this virus. So it's a great moment and a great opportunity for journalism.
So, whilst there are a lot of people who are sceptical of the government and what they're actually telling the people, there are also a lot of people who think that the government need to have more information on us, and they need to have the information on us that tech companies currently do for issues such as security. And there's a big debate raging on this at the moment. So where would you stand on this debate?
On the balance between the necessity of having enough information to protect us from threats and invasion of privacy.
Yeah.
It is the debate of our time.
Yeah.
I'm by nature, I'm on the one hand a freedom of speech. I'm a freedom of speech advocate, if not a fundamentalist.
Yeah.
So I believe that freedom of speech is extremely important. And at the same time, I am not instinctively particularly a privacy advocate.
Yeah.
So I think this is a debate that's very difficult for journalists, because we like to delve into people's lives.
Yeah.
We like to find out stuff about people, and where possible, we want to make that as easy as possible for us. But at the same time, I can't help feeling that the new mechanisms that governments and the tech giants, which often work hand in hand, the power they have to not just find out information about us, but to use that information to manipulate us, has reached a level that is very difficult for the individual citizen to understand, let alone control.
Yeah.
So, looking at the work of someone like Peter Pomerantsev, who's a British Russian journalist, who's recently written a book called "This Is Not Propaganda," precisely on this issue of use of data on the one hand and use of fake news on the other.
Yeah.
There are people like Peter who are right at the cutting edge of this, and we do have to seriously increase our understanding.
So loose in your last answer, but there is a big question about these tech companies at the moment and the data that they have on us. And a lot of people view these tech companies now as the greater threat to manipulating their populations than the government. We've seen that in 2016 in the presidential election. We've seen it with Bloomberg in the last few weeks. So do you think that these tech companies do pose a threat to our autonomy to think for ourselves?
I'm always wary of characterising the people or us as a kind of amorphous blob.
Yeah.
And I'm also wary of suggesting that people can't think for themselves and can be easily manipulated. I think the difficulty is that this the effects of this technology are largely unknown. It is so new and so untested that I think we barely understand even the psychological effects of having, for instance, messages from Twitter popping up on your phone constantly. I mean, that's a very simple example, but it's
I often worry that, particularly with Twitter actually, that it's almost like it's almost like a technological version of mental illness in itself. It replicates what it's like to have voices in your head.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of these social media platforms were launched on the public without testing in the way that you would test a medicine or even a new car. I mean, it's just, they were simply launched on us. And so I think I feel about it in a slightly different way to other journalists, in that the very act of using Facebook or Twitter or interactive games, I think we just don't really know enough about what it does to our brains. And then when you add on top of that the layer of active manipulation that companies operate, I think that is dangerous. I mean, on a philosophical level, I worry about something else as well. I mean, my own son is 16, and he is pretty ultra cynical, I have to say. And when he talks about politics, he just thinks everybody is talking nonsense, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a tendency in your generation to think like that. That actually there's this incredible kind of plethora of information out there that's being thrown at you. Yeah. Everyone's calling everything else fake news.
Yeah.
So it's very, very difficult to navigate. And it throws you back. It just throws you back on yourself and becomes ultra individualized. So all you have is your own take on the world, and I think that's almost more dangerous, because the actual ability of big tech to manipulate us, I think, is unproven.
Yeah. So
Cambridge Analytica, for instance, may claim all sorts of things in their marketing. We don't know whether it's actually true. More problematic for me is the fact that very business model screws with our ideas of objective truth.
Yeah. So, do you think in order to try and find this idea of objective truth, we have to be more conscious in what we are reading? Do you think we have to look at multiple news sources to come to a conclusion?
I think probably what will happen in the end. Excuse me. I think probably what will happen in the end is that we will come full circle, as we always have with media, which is that you have, at certain points in history, you have a Wild West where everything's up for grabs. If you think of the 18th century press, for instance, it was very difficult to know what was true and what wasn't. And what happens is that authority begins to be established. People begin to trust. Authority begins to be established, and people begin to trust, say, the Times as an authority. And that authority takes a long time to be established. Yeah. I think we're in one of those periods again now, where what will happen is eventually people will turn around and say, actually, I would like to trust something here. So it's your job as a generation coming through really to establish those new authorities. And then they'll be challenged too, and that's fine, but at the moment everything is under threat, and I think that, for instance, the present attacks on the BBC clearly make it very difficult for the BBC to establish its authority. But it's important to have that. Expertise is important, and truth matters, and it is up to big media institutions to re-establish themselves as the source of that authority. Yeah.
So another aspect of your journalism has looked at religion, and particularly Islam.
Yes.
And I guess in the context of this discussion of trust, there seems to be a lot of breakdown of trust between different religious groups, and there seems to be an increase in extreme atheist views as well as extreme religious views.
Yes.
So how do you think this is affecting society?
I suppose it's all of a piece, really, isn't it? I don't think it's a coincidence that during a period of the breakdown of old established authorities, so whether it's kind of capitalism on one side, communism on the other, I don't think it's a coincidence that there was the re-emergence of radical religion, after 1989, and indeed, historically, radical Islam can take a certain amount of credit for helping bring about the downfall of Soviet Russia. This is not unconnected. I'm not religious myself. I'm not someone who has faith, but I think an understanding of faith is very important. So you might say, as certain commentators have said, that the rise of populism and the rise of irrational religious-based politics is entirely umbilically connected. But I think it's slightly different in that I'm not someone who dismisses people for their religious beliefs at all. I think it would be very difficult to proceed in the modern world if you don't accept that certain people feel very strongly about their faith. So if you enter, for instance, negotiating peace in the Middle East with a view that these are all kind of idiots who believe stupid things, you're not going to get anywhere. You have to have at least an understanding. You may not respect the tenets of their religion. You may not respect even the expression of their religion. But you have to recognise that people do genuinely believe. And so I would caution. I would suggest that a degree of sensitivity is needed in moving into that kind of world. At the same time, I'm quite happy to be very critical of particularly radical Islam, because I think it's very damaging particularly to young people who get involved in extremist politics.
So, just lastly, you've alluded to it already, but how can we promote this sort of willingness to have a discussion about our beliefs instead of just already assuming that someone who doesn't hold my own belief is stupid?
I have to say it's very difficult. I'd like to think that I went about my journalism with an open mind, and I studied Islam at university and did a master's degree in the history of Islam, in an attempt to understand. But it is often the case that even with the best will in the world, that when you try and address these issues, that people assume that you are being critical of their faith. So I'm not saying I have all the answers, and sometimes I've got it wrong in the way I've expressed myself. But I can only think that it's important to have that discussion. So even though you might get it wrong, and you might even cause offence sometimes. It's absolutely crucial to have that discussion. And again, particularly important for younger people to have that discussion, because for me, as an established newspaper journalist or broadcaster or whatever, it's relatively easy for me to take what might be seen as controversial stances. It's much more difficult for a young journalist coming into the profession to do that. But people are going to have to, because this issue is not going to go away, and
if we're not prepared to have open and sometimes very difficult discussions, then we're going to get nowhere.
Brilliant, cool. So thanks for talking with us today. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you.